Hello, all, and welcome back to another episode of Movies and Us, a weekly gathering place filled with conversations about movies, stories, and connection. My name is Jennifer Hahn.
And I'm Sarah Callan.
And today we are going to be reviewing the film Origin. Okay, Sarah, kick us off with an IMDb summary for Origin.
I'm going to pivot, and I'm going to actually use the Hulu summary because the IMDb summary was not good. So this is the Hulu summary, which is the superior summary.
Okay.
While investigating the global phenomenon of caste and its dark influence on society, a journalist faces unfathomable personal loss and uncovers the beauty of human resilience.
All right. So let's dive in Movies and Us tradition with our one-sentence summaries for the movie Origin. Sarah, what is yours?
Mine is, y'all have to read Caste.
PSA to the entire population of the human race.
Honestly, though, this is the best book promo video that I have ever seen.
Yep. I had that thought throughout the entire movie, and I've had this book on hold for the longest time at my local library, and I'll just push it out because, I'm still working on other books. But let me tell you, after finishing this movie, I was like, we are going to remove the suspension of the whole timelines. So as soon as this book is available, I am so intrigued to dive into it. This is the best book promo video ever. My one-sentence summary is the phrase "truth spoken in love" personified as a movie.
Oh, yes. Yes, it is. Mm-hmm. Truth is being spoken in love, and you are not going to miss it.
Nope. All right. So let's dive in to share our thoughts about Origin, and we will keep our thoughts at a high level in this first section, and then we'll include a spoiler in a bit. But as we talk about this movie at a high level, it'd be great to also start with how we have or have not read the book Caste before watching this movie. I know that it's a book that's been beloved by so many people. As I mentioned earlier, haven't got a chance to read it yet. But Sarah, I'm curious your thoughts about this movie and perhaps how your relationship with the book was before going into this movie.
Yeah, we decided to review this movie like a week ago. And as soon as we decided that we were going to review this, I was immediately like, I need to get this book. I need to read this book like you. I've been wanting to read it for so long. So I went out and I bought it, and I sadly was not able to finish a 400 plus page book in a week. So I'm halfway done. And it was really funny because there's a section in her book that is the pillars of caste. And I had just finished that section. I made myself dinner, fed the dogs, and then plopped on the couch to watch this movie, immediately after. So it's just been a fire hose of caste for the past few days as I've been reading the book and then thinking about this movie. I'm deep in it right now. But honestly, Jen, you need to read this book. It's so well written. I know this is going to be a review about the movie, but if you will just indulge me for a hot second.
Oh my gosh, of course.
The book is it's so well written. It's so engaging. There's a scene in Origin where Isabel is having that conversation with Marion, and she's just make it plain.
Yep. Talk
like real people. And you can feel that while reading this book. I don't know if Isabel actually had a conversation like that, but this book it's difficult subject matter to read, especially for me as a white American. It's difficult to read, but the way that Wilkerson writes is absolutely beautiful. It's so engaging. It's littered with stories that just reel you in and just you want to keep reading. And so I can't recommend this enough. I'm not done with it, but I highly recommend reading this book. And I think that Origin is just a beautiful companion to it as well. And there are so many things while watching that I was thinking about the book, and there are lines that people would say or themes that would come up or things that are depicted on screen. And I was like, oh, I just read that. I remember that line. I remember that story. And so it was just so cool to see such a dense work put onto the screen in this way. In case you can't already tell, I really enjoyed the movie. I had a great time with it, and was just so impressed at Ava DuVernay's ambition in this to not just, I mean, number one, to try and make a movie about
Yeah.
this book is just an audacious goal, and I love that. And then the way that she did it by creating a really holistic view of what this process looked like. You know, you can't separate the material from the author, and this movie really integrates those two, and shows how all parts of Isabel Wilkerson's life impacted the writing of this, and helped her in processing through everything she was going on in her life. So I'm really, really impressed by this movie, and I'm also loving the book, which probably helped influence how much I loved the movie. So yeah.
I love it. I love it. Okay, so I'm going to pepper you some questions about the book. And I think it's important to talk about because so much of this movie is about the birthing of this book. So it's fitting. Don't feel like you have to like scope that out of this conversation. I think it's an important part of all of the heart that and intention and mission that went into this book. So I mean, I'm curious to know if the book is focused on the subject matter and the domain, and the movie has integrated in a lot more of that personal story of Isabel into the movie. And like, do you see aspects of that in the way that she's written, cast, in why it's personal for her, or the introduction, or is the book far more focused on kind of the domain area and the film weaving in the personal piece, or do you find that the book has also heavily integrated in the personal piece as well?
Yeah, so far it's focused on the subject matter. Like I didn't know really anything about Isabel Wilkerson's life until I watched Origin and then did my subsequent Googling afterwards. It's very focused on just the subject matter. But then what I love about the movie is that it depicts things that she was doing in her life that are referenced in the book in some way. So in the introduction, she talks about how when the basement floods, you might not want to look at it, and that whole section at the end of Origin is pulled from the introduction in the book. And so I don't know if what's depicted in Origin is actually like what happened and how she experienced that, but it was so cool to see when she's processing through everything she's processing through with this house and all of these repairs that need to be made, and then you read the introduction of Cast, it makes sense. And so that's why I think that it's a really good companion, and Origin in some ways is almost like a good teaser of the book, because then high level what this is about, and you can see some of the strands, and then the book just takes everything so much deeper. And there's so many parts in Origin that seeing stories depicted on screen made them even more powerful. Like there's some gut-wrenching things that you read in this book, but then you see it happening on screen, and it's just a whole nother level of like gut punch. So anyway, all that to say, Cast, as far as I've read so far, is not really a personal story, but you can feel in the way that it's written that it's deeply personal to Isabel Wilkerson.
I see. And well, my thoughts about Origin are that I also absolutely adored this movie. In general, I'm so fascinated by the choices of what Ava DuVernay births into the world for us to experience, and she's so passionate and investigative and mission driven, and really thinking about the impact and legacy of her work. That like this makes all the sense. It's got her name written all over it, and for her to feel so passionately to bring Isabel's life to the big screen and to have it be so personal and vulnerable as well is quite something. I think there's so many things to discuss about this movie. One of the things that I think was most fascinating to me is how much the personal events of Isabel's life both added to and reflected the things that she was studying. And I think the film did an amazing job of showcasing how they really augment each other. And so there's metaphors or visual moments that you see are related to the domain area of study that Isabel's diving into, and yet it resonates so deeply for her as well. So the one that is like a perfect example of this is the house metaphor that she includes towards the end of the film. I won't go into too much detail quite yet. We can talk a little bit about in spoilers, but I think that is a perfect example of the communication of the concept of legacy and what we inherit from generation to generation, how we leave it for the next generation. But it's also one of the big areas of, transformation and a new chapter turning over for Isabel as she begins to move forward from so much that she's experienced in her life from the seasons of loss. And so, like, the way that this film so expertly weaves these many strands together in a way that they all augment each other is pretty incredible and pretty challenging to do. But I think one of the things that really strikes me about this movie is what I referenced in my one sentence summary. There is so much truth that this movie is unafraid to lead us to the very, very forefront of, and asking us to sit with it and reckon with it. But it does it in such a loving and warm and deeply human way that I think is important for these kinds of conversations. And I feel like there's so many examples we have now of truth or some version of truth that people are looking to advocate for. And there's so much passion and hurt and uh, mission, the way that they want to communicate about truth, but the way that this film is able to weave in the deep humanity of it all and almost the empathy and understanding of these systems in place for us to really sit with, I think is a really key part of what makes this movie so incredible. And I think it's something that I find to be missing in so many of these important conversations. There's a lot of emotion behind these big conversations, but the ability to still find connection despite these hard truths, I think is pretty admirable and rare to see. And I feel like this movie exemplifies that in such a meaningful way. And yeah, I think that's something that really like struck me after watching this film. It's just how this film can hold both of those two things at the same time.
Yeah, this film is, it's very impressive what it's been able to pull off. You know, this movie shouldn't work, honestly. Like,
Mm-hmm.
this is a movie about a woman who just goes through so much while also researching this topic and writing this book. Like, that doesn't seem like a movie idea, and yet this movie is so engaging, and it just kind of pulls you in. And obviously that's the writing and directing of Ava DuVernay. Ingenue Ellis does a fantastic job as Isabel Wilkerson, and you just want to spend time with her as she's figuring this out. And it's really cool to see this depiction of researching and writing, and how it's not this really linear process, but throughout the film you're watching her, she has an idea and she knows that something is here and she can see it, but she can't articulate it yet. And it's so cool to watch her in all of these different conversations with different people from different perspectives, kind of giving her feedback on what she's saying. And some people push back on her, some people offer things that help, you know, reinforce her idea. But it's so interesting to watch her doing the research and doing this hard work and putting the puzzle pieces together to create this book that is very, very powerful, but is also really creative too. You can see her creative thinking, um, and then also just her love for language, and like you said, her love for truth and wanting to expose these things. It's I love how all of these things are packed into this film, that you might not expect to be here, but they're all here and they all complement each other very, very well.
Yeah, it's so good. It's so good. There's so much to talk about. Let's include a spoiler alert here. So if you haven't seen Origin yet, oh my gosh, we cannot rave about it enough, as you can see. So definitely check out Origin if you've got 2 hours to spare. And then if you've got several more hours to spare, definitely go and check out Cass. It sounds like Sarah's absolutely loving it from what she's read. And I think there's maybe parts of the themes in this film that you already get to experience and then go deeper and soak in a little bit deeper in as well. So, uh, okay, where shall we dive in first? I just feel like there's like a treasure trove of things to talk about. Maybe let's start with what was a theme or aspect of Origin that really stood out to you after watching.
Yeah, I think one of the most I don't know, powerful things I think for me is how this movie is paced and how it's set up. Um, we are kind of constantly jumping through time, and you know, we follow Isabel's life in a linear fashion for a little bit, and then once she's researching, we're hopping back from her personal life to her research, to vignettes of historians, back to even some of her memories. And I loved the way that those were all intertwined together, because on the one hand, it keeps things interesting, you know, like I feel like bringing a research project to the screen could be difficult and it could be boring because a lot of it is just like a person reading things. And so I think that like jumping back and forth helps create a sense of momentum and give some like visual contrast so that we stay interested in what's going on. But I also think that it creates this really helpful, holistic view. It's so easy to try and like isolate and just focus on one thing, and that's what historians have had been doing in this case. You know, there were historians about slavery in the U.S., historians about the Holocaust, you know, people studying the Dalits in India, and they're all these separate disciplines. And Isabel, with the help of all of these other people, was able to integrate these things together to see something different. And so it's this creative, holistic work that she's engaged in. And the pacing and structure of Origin is also depicting this sense of wholeness and interconnectedness, and these things aren't separate from each other, but they are all connected. And I love that. It's such a cool way to help us maybe experience some of what she was experiencing without us actually doing the research.
Yeah, and it was neat to see those moments of inspiration or connection light up for her through a conversation with someone that she's engaged with, and especially the fact that she took the time, money, energy to travel to these places and really soak in that environment. Uh, Spend time. I mean, so much of the middle part of the movie is her just talking to different people from those groups, or have studied these specific, very narrow versions of what caste has been expressed, and then through those conversations, I feel like you see those moments of light bulb connection that's happening, of like, oh, this was related to this. And it's neat how those could come from studying and reading and whatnot, but sometimes they really do come when we are immersed in the culture and the environment and just connecting with people. And so I think there's something really neat about seeing that happen with her, and for us as the viewers to feel invested in her research journey by seeing those moments of like the dopamine's hit. Oh my gosh, we just made a key connection point here. So I feel like we got to see that when she was in Germany and she was at the museum and uncovering the meeting minutes from this meeting of the Nazis studying the American system. Like there was this light bulb moment for her. Or when she was in India talking with the Dalits community, and there's that one woman who was studying MLK's speech and the way that he referenced some of the parts of his trip to India. And oh my gosh, there's this connection moment. And we get to see her get excited. And because we're invested in her, we also get to be along that journey of this all coming together at once. So I thought that was really neat and really meaningful. I mean, in a lot of ways, from the very beginning of the film, I was thinking about how this seems to mirror the hero's journey. Like when Amari approaches her at the gala to like, hey, we would love for you to write about this. You are the person for this. She's the reluctant hero in that moment. She's like, I don't know if it's me. I don't know if I'm ready for it. I don't know if I'm the right person to do this. I don't do this anymore. And then we get to see her really get soaked in to this mission, but she's gone on this hero's journey and emerges on the other side changed and transformed.
And with a really killer book too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I loved that too. And I appreciate that this movie opens with that conversation. Obviously establishes that she is a brilliant writer, that she is sought after, and it shows kind of even the difficulty of writing a book, because he makes that comment of like, your book is brilliant or whatever, but it took way too long. And so we're already set up for, okay, what she is going to do is going to be difficult, it's going to be labor intensive, but it's going to be good and it's going to be thoughtful. And so I just thought that was such a good insight into who she is, but then also what this writing process is going to look like. So we're already interested and we're already rooting for her, and also just to see her turn down an opportunity too. A lot of writers don't make a lot of money, and she even mentioned some of that in the movie. And so to see her turning down an assignment and then this is what she produces at the end is also just really, really satisfying to see. She did it her way, and she produced something beautiful and more expansive than was initially thought was possible.
Yeah, no, that's so true. And I think it also is indicative of the care and attention that she approaches and, uh, you know, believes that this project, this study, this investigative research process would need and take. And so she doesn't take that lightly, which I think is also really valuable for understanding the preciousness of the work that is produced as a result of that. Like this was not a lackluster passion for her, that she was only going to step into it when she believed that she was ready and she was called to it. And until then, she's going to say no. And I love the care that she puts into even the types of projects that she takes on. I think it's a testament to her wisdom as well. So one of the things that really I think struck me in Origin, and just thinking about all of the ways that you could have created a piece of film or documentary that was really showcasing some of the themes and concepts that are in Cast. Like I was thinking about this naturally would have lent itself to being a documentary, and Ava DuVernay has created documentaries in the past that have been so powerful and so incredible. 13th, if you haven't gone to see it yet, this is another PSA to also go and check that out because it is so good. But I thought it was just such a intentional choice to have Origin be this kind of fictional retelling of Isabel's experience, and even bring to life some of those scenes and moments that she is studying as part of her research project, because the power of film as a visual medium, an auditory medium, all of it coming together really allows for the emotions of these domain areas come to life in a different way that a book cannot. So I think you referenced this earlier as well, but um, there are vignettes and snippets of certain families or people groups or stories from Isabel's research that are kind of brought to life in Origin. And it was specifically in the vignette that was depicting Al Bright as a young little kid and experiencing segregation and separation from his peers on a hot summer day where he just wants to play at the pool. Like, I think the emotions of that moment and what that must have felt like for little Al in his tiny brain experiencing something as traumatic as this for the for his life and for this moment for us as the viewers, that's something that film was able to bring to life, and complementing that with the research and the data and the telling of it in a book is just different when we get to see it and hear it. So I thought that was a fascinating choice and such an intentional choice to use all of the aspects of filmmaking magic to really hit home a point that is brought to life in a different way in a film medium versus a primarily written medium. And so I thought that was a really fascinating piece of what makes Origin so great and so complementary to the book that I thought was really interesting.
Yeah, that story is in the book, and that was one. After I read it, I had to put the book down for a little bit
Yeah.
because I was just like gutted from that. And it's a heartbreaking story to read, and Isabel wrote it so well. Like you do feel like you're immersed in it when you're reading the book, but then to see it on screen is just a different level of heartache that happens within you. And then afterwards to see Isabel lying on the blanket with little Al was just, man, chef's kiss, but also like, wow, heartbreaking. And I think that Origin is so smart in what it focuses on. There are certain parts in the movie that those really stood out to me in the book too, or there are certain lines that she says that I very distinctly remember reading in the book. And so the way that Ava DuVernay just poured over this material and strategically selected these really important parts of this book to include in the movie, I thought was so smart. One of the things that really shocked me while reading Cast, and it's in the movie too, is that bit about the Nazis using American laws to craft their legal rules for the extermination of the Jews. And that is so wild to me. And I had never learned that their laws were patterned off of laws in America. And that blew my mind. And so then to see, like you said, her discovering that in the museum, to see the recreations of that, to hear the words that they said, read aloud, and then to see the very real effects of that, I thought were just so powerful in really hitting that point home, because I feel like a lot of people maybe don't know that fact. And so that was just another one of those really important things that I love that the movie did make sure to highlight.
Yes. I did not know that until watching that scene as well, which is just it's shocking, but I think it's also such a great representation of something that she says in her speech at the end. She says we need to know. And I feel like that is also the mission of the book, of Cast, but it's also the mission of Origin as well, of being able to use these mediums to create that awareness and understanding, and to inform the masses and the people about these connection points and these stories and these systems, like that. The way that we can use these mediums to communicate and transfer knowledge, but also to transfer the emotions and the feelings of what that can be like. I think is an important like mission, it seems, for both the book and for the movie, you know, of these two females and their teams to bring this to the public. And that's why I'm really glad we're reviewing it, because I feel like it's through conversations like these and raving about these types of content that really just create more awareness that they exist, and for people to go and experience it for themselves. So yeah, I feel like they are such great examples of the like we need to know.
Yeah, and I love particularly that this movie exists, because not everybody is going to take the time to read a 400 plus page book. It's so good. It's worth reading, but not everybody's going to do it. But somebody might be more willing to sit down and watch a 2 hour movie. And the way that all of these really important parts of cast show up in the movie, I think really helps drive the point home. You know, there's obviously added richness in the book, and there's a lot more in here that wasn't able to make it into the movie. But so many of the really impactful moments that I've read so far, and I'm only halfway through, are in the movie. And so if you've read, or if you've read the movie, if you've watched the movie, you get the main thesis of the book. You get the gist, and there's enough there to do that hard work and take next steps and consider things in the world around us that you might not ever have considered before. And so it's a very difficult movie to watch, but it's an important one too. So like you said, I'm also very glad that we got to finally watch this. I'm so excited. This was on my list to see last year, and I just wasn't able to make the time. So I'm glad that we are finally here now, talking about it, because it is a really important work, and it's so creative, it's so inventive and interesting, to bring a book like this to the screen. It's great.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, the challenge of picking and choosing what to bring to life and how to structure and organize it as well. Like Ava DuVernay wrote the script for this, and her ability to really capture those key pieces and bring them together in a way that's almost like this collage of moments and pieces from history and past stories, and they're part of Isabel's research, but also there's these very important vignettes for Isabel's life and the emotional journey that she goes on as well. That is such an important part of this story as well as, and the way they all come together so coherently and they add to each other, and the juxtaposition of these moments really highlight or bring out the other aspects of the scenes that are around it. It's like pretty incredible and very layered in a way that I think is challenging to do. But Ava DuVernay has like strung this together in such a powerful way. I think one of the things that I was like, this is absolutely genius that she's done, is there are these little scenes that further the story of Isabel's research or kind of her emotional journey, but they also are representations of cast happening in Isabel's life. So the two that really stood out to me were, one of them is when she's having the conversation with the woman at the dinner table in Germany, who's kind of like patronizingly describing slavery to Isabel. And you can see the discomfort on her face and how difficult and challenging it is for her to sit through and listen to these women's comments respectfully, but also that it is triggering for her in a lot of ways. And that is a like modern day representation of the concepts that she's studying at large. And then there's another little scene where she has the maintenance, or the person that comes to fix the basement sink, and he's wearing a MAGA hat, and you can see that there's such coldness in him at the beginning of their conversation, and he's reluctant to even really look at what the issue is. And only when Isabel connects with him on a personal level around family members and things like that they've lost or how they've grown up, then he, by the end of the scene, is like, okay, let me go look at your let me look at your sink now and actually like quote you properly for it. But beforehand, there's just this standoffness. And I think it's fascinating to see the way that the origin operates on all of these stratospheres and can articulate those layers. You know, we have the macro concepts that Isabel's studying, we see them historically in the series of vignettes, but we also see them at a very micro level for what Isabel's experiencing in the moment. And how all of those are so coherent with each other is really quite incredible and just genius. So just the way that Ava DuVernay has written those details and those little moments into the larger script and tackling these big ideas, but also showcasing how they show up at the smaller level is really incredible.
Yeah, yeah, and how they're still happening today
Yeah.
too. I think at least for what I remember being taught about slavery and Jim Crow and all of that in school was that was their problem. That was yesterday's problem. You know, Civil War happened, enslaved people were freed, civil rights happened, and now everything's good. You know, that was kind of like what I was taught in school. And obviously everything is not good. And so I love the way that this film is able to show those things, and you know, it choosing to begin with Trayvon Martin. The second that I realized that that was Trayvon, I was like, oh no, I'm not ready for this movie, because you know, that's such a horrific moment, and it's obviously one in a string of horrific moments where a black person has lost their life at the hands of another, and it's still happening. And so I love that this movie obviously shows us the history, but it also shows us how black people are being murdered, and these small microaggressions that people of color, especially women of color, are experiencing, and how all of these things are related together, and how Isabel is able to draw on all of these things and show, no, this isn't just racism, it's deeper than that, and pointing out the systemic nature that undergirds all of these things. And like you said, that's all written into the screenplay as well, so we're seeing all of these things and are able to put them together just like Isabel is in her journey.
Yeah, yeah, and it's neat because she's studying these like very large and mass examples of caste as, you know, vignettes. These three main kind of like thread lines throughout the film of being in Germany, her visits in Germany, her visits in India, and then um, there's one more. Oh my gosh, I think it's within in America, around the racism within America. But I love that we get to see it at a micro level because the emotions of it are still there, and the camera is so great in some of those scenes because they are close-ups of Ingenue Ellis Taylor's face, and she is emoting, and she's clearly trying to hold it together in this conversation and to be calm and respectful and to listen. And yet you can see that there's frustration and pain in that as well. You know, there's multiple of those moments throughout the film. And I think those are just as important as these larger ways that caste is really manifested in really dramatic ways historically, but also day to day, it is everywhere. And so I think it really lands home the point that Isabel makes, that we see caste is everywhere around us. It is this force that is at play. It is not something that is just isolated to certain historical moments or seasons or periods in the development of the human race, but it is still here. And I think that point is really driven home. And Ava DuVernay does a great job of showing us as well as telling us as well.
It is still here. So what are we going to do about it? That's
Yep.
kind of, where the movie's going is like, hey, now you're aware. Now what you gonna do?
Mm-hmm.
And I really love that this movie is kind of prodding you to think. And I think especially like as a white American, this is a really important thing for me to watch. This is an important film. These are important concepts to think about because I am part of the dominant cast. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think, especially for someone who looks like me, it is very important to watch a movie like this and wrestle with these concepts and understanding how caste affects my life, but it also affects everyone around me. It affects those that I'm in, that I love, that I'm in relationship with, that I do life with, and really wrestling with that, and then with that knowledge choosing to do something else.
Yeah.
And I again, I'm so glad that this movie exists because it's more accessible. And so like as I'm having conversations with my white friends, I can say like, hey, have you watched Origin?
Mm-hmm.
Let's watch it, let's talk about it, as opposed to, hey, have you read this 400-page book? Like some of them would be
Mm-hmm.
totally down, but some aren't going to have the time. So I think that this is just such a helpful tool, especially for white Americans, to really listen and learn. That was the whole thing during 2020, during COVID, was like white people were like, yes, I'm listening and learning. But we see that that really hasn't amounted to much. So like those of us who want to do this work and want to be allies and be all of these things, like this is a great starting point for that, or that's a great next step on this journey, is to engage with this movie and then do something with it, because cast is everywhere and we can make changes in our own lives to, I don't know, to support those who aren't in the dominant cast. And I really appreciate that this movie includes uh her husband in
Mm-hmm.
it. He's obviously, he gets killed off like 30 minutes in, which was very
Yeah.
traumatizing, but I'm glad that we got to see those little glimpses of him showing how to be an ally, how to push back against the privilege that he was afforded as a white man. And it's not the main point of the movie. He's just in a few little scenes, but I think that that provides such a great model for white Americans, and us being able to learn from just how he interacts with her, how he champions her, how he protects her at times too, from the racism, the casteism, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
that she is experiencing. So I think to this should be required viewing, I think, for white Americans, and he provides a really good example of what it can mean to defy caste, which is not easy, but it is possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And like you mentioned, I love that there is a sense of forward momentum and there's a sense of nudging and opening up for you as a viewer to think about what now what? Okay, you've experienced this and you've felt the feelings, you've had the tears flow, you've sat with these hard truths that have been spoken to you in love, and the movie ends with her voiceover describing the metaphor of a home. And I love it because obviously it's I love metaphors and they speak to me in in special ways. They massage my brain in the ways that it needs to. But there's there's the aspect of her also progressing forward in her life personally through the season of loss and renovating this home that her loved ones have spent so much time in. It's a sense of renewal and forward momentum. But at a larger level, the point she's really making is we are all here for just a set number of decades, and we all inherit a home. And the society that we live in is the home that we are tending to. And I love that even in her voiceover, she acknowledges like it's easy for us to either say we're going to blame the previous generations for the state that we're in, or to say, well, none of that matters anyway because this is just the generation that I'm living in. So why can't we just all reset? But those are two opposite spectrums, opposite sides of the spectrum of reactions to shed ourselves of responsibility of doing something. And she kind of calls us out to say like, hey, that's actually not the point. The point is the reality is we're all inheriting this home, and we can either choose to tend to its gardens, to fix up the foundations of it, and put new artwork on it, and really make it more beautiful to then hand off to the next generation. So for us to see ourselves as part of this larger ecosystem, this larger generational passing down of legacy is significant and meaningful in helping us shape what we do today. And I love that she articulates some of those almost excuses that we give ourselves to not do anything, and but also like lovingly calls us into like, don't we want to do this? Don't we want to make this more beautiful for the next generation that comes, to have a more uh, loving and connected society? Don't we want to do that? And if so, what does that look like for each of us? So I love that the film ends on that, because there's so many films that are important and scathing and reveal and expose these hard truths, but almost leave us in sitting in the state of these very difficult emotions. And this film helps us begin to process them and nudges us into the forward momentum, which I think is really wise of this movie to do.
And just as to reinforce how good a compliment this is to the book, is that's in the introduction, her talking about the house and our responsibility to fix it up and to not look away. And so I think that that's also really, really smart, because if you're watching this movie and then you feel compelled to read the book, it just so seamlessly integrates together, and you feel like it's a continuation of what you were just watching. So I think that that's also maybe a really cool way to like pull people in who maybe start to read the book and then they want to keep reading because they're, I don't know, they're it's a continuation of the movie. So just another really brilliant little thing that like it's smart on its own if you're just watching the movie, but then if you're also going to read the book, it's also smart. So just again, Ava DuVernay did a fantastic job with this screenplay. Her strategic pacing and the way that she has written this, man, Jen, I'm so excited for you to read this book, because it is such a good compliment. Like even in tone, kind of that warmth and that empathy that you feel from this movie, you feel in the book too. So it's incredible to me that these are able to pair together as well as they are, and that doesn't happen by accident. So just once again, props to Ava DuVernay, who did a phenomenal job with this at every level.
Yeah, it's interesting because we have reviewed movies that are the movie depictions of books, and we often talk about like how the movie really captures the spirit of the book and the themes of the book and brought it to life. I think we talked about with Dune and some of these other ones, but it's interesting to also think about how that translates over for this type of book into a movie, and the warmth and the empathy and the connection and the deeply human parts of what it sounds like are in the book or really showcased and like brought to life in movie form. And to see that resonance between book and film depiction is really, really neat to hear. And I'm excited to dive into the book. I'm also very intrigued to see how the book communicates with that same clarity that Isabel seems to communicate with the people in her life. I think it's one of the themes that was really fascinating to me in this movie around like make Amari says to her at the gala at the beginning, make the hard stuff digestible, and then like you mentioned earlier, Marion at the barbecue says, make it plain, and it's neat to see the Isabel in the movie's ability to take these concepts and communicate them in a very clear way around um, these are the ways that we've thought about this in the past. Here is a new mental structure, a new framework to think about these things that creates perspective and lens of the world around us that are helpful and valuable. It's kind of this big like fu to the lady at the dinner table of like you can't make a framework into a book and like aha yes you can, but I'm really intrigued to see the way that the clarity of understanding and the structures and mental models that Isabel in the movie was able to communicate also are kind of brought to life in the book as well. That was, I mean, it was beautiful to see because these are hard concepts and they're really confusing and can get really convoluted. And so, how do we make this accessible?
Yeah, and that's one thing that I'm really have been impressed by with the book is that it is accessible. You know, these
Mm.
are difficult concepts to explore, like emotionally it's difficult, but then also like conceptually it's hard. And especially if you're maybe new to these concepts, it could be hard to maybe digest. And this is not this is not a textbook. It's not like an academic work. So it is very accessible, and her ability to break down complex concepts, and she uses a bunch of metaphors, she uses a lot of stories, there's obviously quotations from primary sources and all of that too,
Mm.
but they complement each other so well. And then you see that in the movie as well, and the way that some of the metaphors like the house go from the page to the screen, and the movie doesn't have to say, this is this is the house metaphor, get yourself ready, I'm going to say a metaphor about the house. But we just see her processing through all of the things and having to do the things with the house that she was doing while happened to be writing the book at the same time. And so to see those things again tying together just very, very well to make it so that you can digest these concepts, because like we just talked about, the point isn't just to gain knowledge. The point
Mm-hmm.
is to become aware of these things and then go and do. And so it has to be accessible for that. So the book and the movie are very good complements to each other in that way. Because it is accessible, just like it's accessible in Origin.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think the other aspect that is important, it sounds like it's in the book as well, but very much in the film, is like you mentioned, it can't just be cognitive understanding and the emotional understanding to really walk in the shoes of what it must feel like and what that experience is like is really the thing that transforms hearts and really allows people to connect deeply. It's it's not it can't just be a transfer of information or an awareness of history. That isn't enough. It's great, but it only will take us so far, and until that emotional connection is made, then the transformation happens. Then the ability to see and understand deeply the experience of another, that's when that happens. And then we can begin to move in a different direction or progress in a different direction. And I think that it sounds like the book's choice, so Isabel's choice to include those stories and descriptions of these experiences of people in the past in the book was so significant to balance out the cognitive transfer of information. But similarly with Origin, it's cool to see the way that Ava DuVernay is using these filmmaking aspects to also communicate the emotions so that we can connect, we can feel, we can understand experientially versus just cognitively. And both of them seem to see clearly that that is where so much clicks into place beyond just the transfer of knowledge.
Yeah, it's not a history textbook. It's not
Yeah.
a historical film,
Mm-hmm.
but it's using that power of storytelling to communicate about really, really complex and important ideas. And both of them do it so well.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. Um, before we wrap, time is flying. What other big aspects of this film really stood out to you that we really wanted to make sure we had time to talk about?
And just another, it was big to me, but it's not like super big in the movie. Is the focus on a Germany bearing witness to the horrors of the Holocaust, and in that conversation that Isabel has with that German woman, um, Isabel contrasting the bearing of witness with our culture in America and the Confederate statues, the
Mm.
Confederate flag, all of these things that are displayed so proudly throughout our country, um, as opposed to the way that Germany has remembered the millions of lives that were lost. And I think for me that contrast was really striking, and especially when you put the two in conversation with each other, because Isabel even says something to the effect of like the number of Black lives that were lost in slavery and Jim
Yeah.
Crow, like there is no official number.
Mm-hmm.
You can't count them. And so I think, especially in America, as conversations are still being had about Confederate statues and the naming of various things after Confederate generals, when you frame these things like that and you put the horrors of slavery in conversation with the systematic extermination of Jews under the Nazis, then these Confederate statues take on a whole different meaning. And so I think for me that was just a really powerful reframing to see, when you think of slavery in isolation, then these conversations go differently. But when you put it in conversation with something like the Nazi regime or the Dalits in India, then you have to see it in a whole different light. So I just that conversation, I've just been really thinking about for the past few days. It's such a powerful way to reframe so many of the conversations that are currently being had.
Mm-hmm. And when you have a mind like Isabel's to zoom out of the specific context that we've been in and kind of see the larger landscape of how this has affected cross cultures and what is boiled down to be universal, and then what maybe is expressed differently in different cultures, but fundamentally has a lot of similarities with each other, then there's these really powerful insights that are uncovered that we wouldn't have if we were just focused on what it looks like for us in our own very specific domain area. So it was fascinating even to see Isabel discuss the concept of caste with her community and her family members, and the way that she unravels the concept of how we use the word racism, and underlying that, like what is the fundamental thing that is fueling it. It's manifested in our country in this specific way, but when you compare that and put it in conversation with another culture, like in India, the fundamental piece behind it, the root source, is actually the same. It's just manifested differently. um, and so her points around, yes, there's a component around race, but there's another country where this is manifested as well, and they are all the same quote unquote race as we understand it. Then what do we do with that dissonance, and how do we resolve that? And those are where those moments and light bulbs of insight really come. And it's neat to see the way that to zoom out and see the larger landscape enables us to understand something more deeply than when we are only focused in our own context, in our own worlds. So I think that all of that was really fascinating to see her almost thought processing of discovery. There's dissonance, there's insight, and there's dissonance, and there's insight, in that cycle of uncovering, unraveling this, that we get to walk with her through, versus just boiling it down to the end insights. Actually, the process of experiencing the distance of these concepts and having to reckon with it, and then on the other side is the insight, was really valuable for us as viewers to experience with Isabel.
Yes, and you know, if you've ever like dreamed anything up or like created anything, then like you've gone through that process. You know, like when you know that there's an idea here, you know something is here, but you're just not quite sure what. And so then you find those people that can help you like really whittle it down and start to find the idea out of, you know, the block of clay, you know. And so it's so fun to watch her on that process, because she has the idea, she knows there's something there, she knows there's interconnectedness, but nobody else can see it. And you can see as the film progresses, she's able to more concretely express these things after she's had additional conversations, after she's done more research, after she's had time, honestly, just with her own brain, just to kind of mull it over. And you see this like sharpening of her argument, and you see the thesis really start to take shape. And then by the end, she has her pillars. And I don't know. I'm a sucker for like a movie about a creative who like has an idea and then is able to like find it and like produce this work in the end. And in some ways that's what this movie is. So it's just so fun to watch her work at this hypothesis and develop it, and be able to watch it go through all of these different iterations. And then now we have this book that I can hold in my hands and read. It's so satisfying to watch, in addition to it being, like you said, kind of like a reluctant hero's journey at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah. Even if you cut out all of the other vignettes, like this movie works powerfully just as like a woman experiencing a season of life of grief and reckoning with those big, hard, difficult emotions, and then finding a sense of purpose and meaning out of all of that she is pouring herself into, and like that in and of itself is already an incredible movie, a moving, incredible film in and of itself, let alone all of the other layers that are interwoven into it as well. So I think that's what makes Origin really incredible, is that like there's so many dimensions and layers to it, and when you put them in conversation with each other, when you juxtapose them, there's a lot of really like powerful stuff that comes from all of the many stratospheres that the story works at.
Yeah, this is one, I'm pretty sure if you watched it with a group, everybody would come away with something different, because it's all in there. There's a lot going on here, and I'm sure that this movie will reward subsequent viewings, because you'll be able to pick out things or connect things that you maybe didn't see the first time. So good.
Yeah. Yep. All right. Well, this is our review and discussion of Origin. If you can't tell, we absolutely love this film, and we recommend checking it out. You can find it available on Hulu. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Movies and Us. Our name sums it up. We're all about movies and the powerful ways we can connect with each other and the world around us. This podcast is about all of us and our shared stories. So everyone is welcome here, and we're so glad you spent time with us today. You can subscribe to this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you tune into your favorite shows. Drop us a rating and review, letting us know your thoughts about Origin or Cast. You can connect with us on Instagram, Threads, and TikTok at moviesandUsPod, or you can always email us at moviesandUsPod@gmail.com. We will be back next week to discuss the film The Bike Riders. We hope you have an amazing week, and we'll see you again next week.